Hi, I'm Jilly G. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to show you my pumpkin streusel muffins. And you don't have to do this as muffins. You could do this in 2 loaf pans if you wanted to. But I like it as muffins. And gluten-free, of course, as always. And I've got everything ready. But first what I'm doing here is I'm not using cupcake or muffin liners today. I've noticed if I do this recipe and I use the little cupcake liners, they tend to stick to the papers for some reason. But I am greasing my muffin pan here, and I just have, just a little pastry brush. And I don't know about you, but I save my bacon grease. And so I can use it for recipes like this or frying eggs, really whatever you like to use bacon grease for. And if you don't like the flavor of bacon grease with your pumpkin muffins, you could just use butter or coconut oil, whatever, vegetable oil. And this recipe makes about 16 muffins. And so I've greased this whole pan and I've greased 4 in that pan. Now that we're done with our bacon grease, set your pans aside. I have a cutting board, my knife, and I have about a cup of walnuts here, a heaping cup. And I'm just gonna toast these in the oven while I get the rest of my streusel topping ready. And my oven is preheated to 350. So for our streusel topping, what you'll need is a half a cup of gluten-free flour, a pinch of salt. This little salt jar has a little spoon, makes it really handy. And this little spoon is a 1/4 teaspoon. So about that, in with my flour. And then I have a 1/4 cup of butter cut up. And my butter is not right out of the fridge, but not room temperature either. It's still pretty firm. And what we're gonna do, I'm gonna toss it in the flour first, but my flour is room temperature. And I'm just trying to coat the pieces of butter with the flour before I start mashing it. And then I've showed you this before, but I'll show you again, is just mash between your thumb and your fingers there. And we just want a crumbly, buttery flour mixture is what we're looking for. And once it looks like this, it looks like really big pieces of butter in with the flour. I'm gonna stop right there and check on my nuts. And my nuts are done toasting, so set this aside. We'll come back to that in just a minute. And you don't want your nuts to be super crispy because they're gonna go back in the oven. And you don't have to use nuts. Or you could use a different kind of nuts. I tend to just use what I've got in the fridge. And walnuts is what I've got today. And the walnuts that I get are usually kind of in bits and pieces anyways. There are some big ones, so it doesn't take very much chopping. But I usually go by the size that I want to go on top of a muffin. Little bite-sized pieces that you're gonna mix into your streusel topping. If you have really big pieces of nuts, it won't mix together very well. But you don't want it finely chopped either. You want it to be chunky. Okay, that looks really good. They're still a little bit warm. I'm gonna spread them out so they cool off a little bit faster. You don't want it to be hot when we mix it in with our butter, because you want the butter to stay in biggish chunks. So while my nuts are cooling off the rest of the way, just set it aside. I'm gonna start mixing our dry ingredients. We'll come back to the topping in just a minute. So in this bowl, I have 1½ cups of my gluten-free flour mix and all of my other dry ingredients here. I have 1 teaspoon of baking soda, a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1½ teaspoons of cinnamon, a 1/2 teaspoon of allspice, 1/4 teaspoon of ginger, and a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. And just mix this around. It doesn't take very much. And just set this aside. Ooh. And bring back your nuts. They're cooled off enough. I'm just gonna add them to my butter flour mixture. Get this out of the way. You wanna start mashing in the butter with your nuts and your flour. Try and get your nuts a little bit coated in the butter and flour. And once it looks like this, where there's no really big chunks of butter or flour, and it's all pretty well mixed together. And it might seem kind of strange to mix it this way, but then this way, as I mentioned, the butter and the flour kind of coat the nuts too. So once you've got this the way you want it to be, get it off of your fingers. And I'm gonna clean up a little bit. If you were doing this in a food processor, you'd want your butter to be cold. And if you're using sugar, this recipe would call for either 1/2 cup of white sugar or 1/2 cup of brown sugar. And you would mix that all together during the whole flour butter mixture process. But today I'm using maple syrup. That's my other cat. So today I'm using maple syrup, and I have a 1/4 cup here. And I know it seems like it's not gonna work, but it works really well. So I'm just gonna pour this mixture, I'm just gonna pour this maple syrup into my flour nut mixture and give it a good mix. And just using a spoon, I just stir it around. And you can see that it's not dry and crumbly like a regular streusel topping, but this actually works really well. Set that aside, and I have 1/2 cup of butter here, 1 stick, that needs to be a lot softer than this. Not melting, but really soft. Mix that around a little bit. And I have 1/2 cup of honey and 1 tablespoon of molasses. This recipe usually calls for 1 cup of white sugar or 1 cup of brown sugar, or a combination of both. But 1/2 cup of honey and 1 tablespoon of molasses is what we're doing today. And if you wanted to, you could do 1/2 cup of maple syrup and keep going with your maple syrup theme. But I like the combination of the honey and the maple syrup. And just mix this around till it's really combined. Once that's all mixed together, I'm going to start adding in my eggs. Egg number 2. You don't have to mix them in one at a time. Egg number 3. 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And I have a 1/4 and I have 1 cup and 1/4 of pumpkin. It might be a little bit more than 1 1/4 cups, but it's fine. And we'll just go all in here. And mix this till it's really combined. And once you've got all of that mixed together, I have a 1/4 cup of milk. Isn't this a cute little jar? You could do a 1/4 cup of heavy cream, but I'm just doing milk. I'm going to switch to my spatula for the dry ingredients. And I'm just going to go all in one. And just mix this till it's mostly combined. Scraping the sides and the bottom as you go. It doesn't take hardly anything to get this recipe together. I'm going to use this same spoon. Make sure nothing is stuck to your spatula that wants to be mixed into your batter. Bring over your muffin pans. You want to fill the muffin cups up a little over halfway. And I just put a little bit in each one first, just so I know that each one is getting the same amount. Once you've got them all partway full, I start filling the rest up and just make sure they're all even. Make sure to get all of it. Both cats are in the kitchen with me today. Last I knew, cats didn't even like pumpkin. I don't know why they're here today. It's not like it's tuna fish or something. Once you're happy with that, move all of your things out of the way and bring back your streusel topping. I'm going to give it a good stir. If your kitchen is like mine and it tends to be on the cold side. Even with my oven on, you'll notice that it has firmed up a little bit. I just sprinkle a little bit on each one just so I make sure they all get some and an even amount. And once you've got all of your crumble topping on all of your muffins, they're ready to go in the oven. And again, my oven is at 350, and these will go for about 30 minutes. And because you have this topping on, they're a little harder to tell when they're done. You can do the toothpick trick, and that works pretty good. My muffins went for about 30 minutes in the oven, give or take. And I tested them with a toothpick, and I kind of go in a little bit sideways to go underneath this little crumble topping. And you'll notice they're not super tall. If you weren't doing this crumble topping, you would just do 12. So the original recipe is just 12 muffins, but with the crumble topping, I always worry that they'll get too big and spill over everywhere. So I'm gonna let these cool in the pans for about 10 minutes and then take them out of the muffin pan and let them cool the rest of the way on the racks. My muffins have been cooling in the pan for about 10 minutes. I'm just using a little butter knife here that's kind of roundish edges so I don't scratch up my muffin pans. Just to loosen the sides a little bit. The bacon grease works really well. Move these over here. And I have my other little cooling rack here. And be careful not to knock off your crumb. Be careful about your crumb topping. And this little butter knife helps to lift them out of the pan. But you see how easy they come out. Move them all over a little bit. We need room. Just to be careful. Turn it around so you don't have to reach over all of the other ones. And they are still a little bit warm. And you'll notice how dark they are. They are not burnt, I promise. That's the molasses that makes them that dark color. If you had used white sugar or brown sugar or even maple syrup, they wouldn't be as dark. And even just honey. But because I added that tablespoon of molasses, that's why they're dark. They look like a gingerbread cookie. And I'm just going to spread them out just a little bit. Let them all cool off. They look really good. My muffins are nice and cool. They've been cooling for about 45 minutes or so. So I'll just show you what one looks like on the inside. As I mentioned, they look really dark. And I think the camera kind of makes them look a little bit darker than they are. They look really good. Even if you didn't have nuts in your topping, it gets a little bit crunchy. And it's really good. And even though I used bacon grease to grease my muffin tins, they don't taste like bacon. Although I wouldn't mind if they did. They're really good. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sharing. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And we'll see you on the next one.